The time is right. The sunset is beautiful.
That morning, it was just another quiet ride down a dusty trail, until he saw the stranger. Injured, desperate, and barely able to speak, he didn't hesitate. He offered help, not knowing who this man really was, or what trouble was following him. By sunset, everything changed. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon, riders approaching fast. They weren't there to say thank you. They were looking for someone. And when they reached his ranch, every eye turned to him, because the one man he helped might have just brought danger straight to his door. The morning broke slow and quiet, the kind of stillness that only existed far from towns and crowded roads. A pale golden light stretched across the land, brushing the hills and fields with warmth as the sun climbed steadily into the sky. The air carried a crisp chill, mixed with a dry scent of earth and wild grass. Ethan Carter rode alone, just as he always did. His horse moved at an easy pace along the narrow trail that cut through his land, hooves pressing softly into the dust. This was his routine every morning without fail. Check the fences. Scan the horizon. Make sure nothing had changed overnight. Because out here, even the smallest change could mean trouble. Ethan wasn't a man who welcomed surprises. Life had taught him that the hard way. Quiet days, steady work, and predictable routines, that was how he kept things under control. And control meant safety. He adjusted his hat slightly, eyes scanning the distance. The land stretched wide and open, broken only by scattered trees and low hills. Nothing moved except the wind brushing through the grass. For a while, everything felt exactly as it should. Until it didn't. At first, it was just a shape. Something out of place along the side of the trail, half hidden by dust and shadow. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he slowed his horse, his instincts sharpening instantly. A rock. No. Too uneven. An animal. Maybe. But as he got closer, the shape shifted slightly and his grip on the reins tightened. It was a man. Lying still. Ethan's horse let out a quiet snort, sensing the tension. He brought it to a stop several feet away, his gaze fixed on the figure in the dirt. Out here, a man on the ground was never a simple thing. It could mean injury. It could mean trouble. Or worse, it could mean a trap. Ethan didn't move right away. Instead, he studied the stranger carefully, looking for any sign of movement beyond the faint rise and fall of his chest. The man was face down, one arm stretched awkwardly beneath him, his clothes torn and coated in dust. And then Ethan saw it. Dark stains along the fabric. Blood. A quiet curse slipped under his breath. He swung one leg over and dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Every step he took toward the stranger was measured, cautious. "Hey!" he called out, his voice firm but not loud. "You hear me?" No response. Only the faint whisper of wind. Ethan took another step closer, eyes scanning the surrounding land as much as the man himself. The horizon remained empty. No movement. No sign of anyone else. Still, something didn't feel right. He crouched beside the stranger, close enough now to see the pale skin beneath the dirt, the shallow breathing, the tight lines of pain etched across his face. "Hey!" Ethan said again, a little sharper this time. The man stirred. Barely. His fingers twitched against the ground, and a weak, broken breath escaped his lips. His eyes opened just a fraction, unfocused and glassy. Relief flickered through Ethan, but it didn't last long. Because fear followed right behind it. Not his own. The stranger's. It was there in his eyes for just a second before they slipped shut again. Fear like that didn't come from getting lost, or falling off a horse. It came from being chased. Ethan straightened slightly, his gaze sweeping the horizon again. The land was still empty, silent as ever. But now it felt different. Heavy. Like something unseen was already closing in. He looked back down at the man. This was the moment. The choice. Ride away, and leave whatever trouble this stranger carried behind. Or help him, and risk bringing that trouble home. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand along the back of his neck. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. He already knew what he was going to do. Some things weren't decisions. They were just who you were. Carefully, He rolled the man onto his back. The stranger groaned weakly, his body tensing with pain. Up close, the injuries looked worse: cuts along his arms, bruises forming across his ribs, and a deep gash near his shoulder that had soaked through his shirt. "Easy," Ethan said, his voice quieter now. "You're not dying out here. Not today." The man didn't respond, drifting somewhere between consciousness and darkness. Ethan slipped an arm under his shoulders and lifted him slowly. The stranger was lighter than he expected, too light. Like he hadn't eaten in days. That only made things worse. Whatever had happened to him, it hadn't been quick. Ethan guided him toward the horse, steady and careful, every movement deliberate. It took effort, but eventually he managed to get the man positioned across the saddle. The stranger let out a faint groan, but didn't resist. Ethan grabbed the reins, pausing for just a second. His eyes drifted back toward the horizon one last time. Still nothing. But the uneasy feeling stayed. Strong as ever. "Let's go," he said quietly. With that, he turned the horse toward home. And just like that, the quiet morning was over. By the time Ethan reached the ranch, the sun was high and unforgiving, casting sharp shadows across the yard. What had started as a quiet morning had turned heavy, filled with questions he couldn't yet answer. He didn't waste time. Guiding the horse to a stop, Ethan carefully lowered the stranger down, supporting most of his weight as he carried him inside. The man barely reacted, his strength was fading fast. Inside, the air was cooler, dimmer. Ethan laid him on the old wooden bed near the window, where light filtered in just enough to see the damage clearly. And it was worse than he thought. The cuts were deep, uneven, like they'd been made in a struggle, not an accident. Bruises spread across his ribs and arms, dark and fresh. Whoever this man was, he hadn't just been hurt. He'd been hunted. Ethan grabbed a basin of water and a cloth, working in silence as he cleaned the wounds. The stranger flinched now and then, a weak reaction, but never fully woke. "Hold still," Ethan muttered, more out of habit than expectation. As he wrapped a strip of cloth around the man's shoulder, the stranger suddenly tensed. His eyes snapped open. Wild. Panicked. "You shouldn't have helped me," he rasped, his voice barely holding together. Ethan paused, studying him. "You were bleeding out on my land. Didn't seem like I had much choice." The man tried to push himself up, but pain shot through him, forcing him back down with a strained breath. "They'll come," he whispered. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "Who will?" For a moment, the stranger didn't answer. His eyes darted toward the window, toward the open land beyond, as if expecting to see something already there. "You don't understand," he said finally. "They don't stop. They won't." Ethan leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. That uneasy feeling returned, stronger now. "Then help me understand," he said. But the stranger only shook his head weakly, exhaustion pulling him back under. Within seconds, his eyes closed again, his breathing uneven but steady. Silence filled the room. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at him. The warning echoed in his mind. "They'll come." He glanced toward the window, toward the endless stretch of land outside. Still empty. Still quiet. But not for long. The afternoon settled in with a quiet weight that Ethan could not ignore. The sun stood high, pouring heat over the land, yet something felt off. The wind had shifted, moving in slow, uneven breaths across the fields. Even the usual sounds seemed distant, as if the land itself was holding back. Ethan stepped outside, wiping his hands on a cloth. He paused on the porch, eyes moving across the open range. At first, everything looked the same. Dry grass swaying. Fences standing still. The long trail stretching into the distance. But then he noticed it. Far out near the edge of the horizon, a thin line of dust began to rise. It was faint at first, almost easy to miss. But Ethan had spent too many years on this land to ignore a sign like that. Something was coming. And it was moving fast. His jaw tightened as he stepped down from the porch, his gaze fixed on that growing cloud. It did not drift like the wind-carried dust. It pushed forward with purpose. Riders. More than one. Ethan felt a quiet tension settle into his chest. He did not rush. He did not panic. Instead, he He turned and walked toward the barn with steady steps. Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the scent of hay and wood. He reached for his rifle, lifting it from its place with familiar ease. His hands moved without hesitation, checking it with calm precision. He was not looking for trouble, but he would not be caught unprepared. Behind him, the sound of the door creaking open broke the silence. Ethan turned slightly. The stranger stood in the doorway, holding himself upright with clear effort. His face was pale, his movements slow, but his eyes were wide and fixed on the horizon. "They are coming," he said. Ethan followed his gaze. The dust cloud had grown larger now. Closer. "How many?" Ethan asked. The man swallowed, his voice low. "Enough." Ethan studied him for a moment. "You want to tell me what you brought to my door?" The stranger shook his head, a mix of regret and fear crossing his face. "It was never meant to reach you." "That does not change the fact that it did," Ethan replied. Silence stretched between them. The sound of distant hooves began to carry through the air. Faint at first, then clearer with each passing second. The stranger took a step back, as if the strength was leaving him again. "If they find me here—" Ethan cut him off. "They will." He stepped past the man and out into the open yard, the rifle resting low in his hands. His posture remained steady, his breathing even. The riders were close now, shapes forming within the dust. Ethan planted his feet and watched them approach. Whatever this was, it had arrived, and it was not leaving without an answer. The riders came into full view as the sun began its slow drop toward the horizon. There were 8 of them. They moved with control, not rushing, not shouting. Their horses slowed as they reached the edge of the ranch, spreading out in a wide arc that closed in with quiet intent. Dust settled around them, hanging in the air like a thin veil. Ethan stood his ground in the center of the yard, the rifle resting in his hands. He did not raise it, but he did not lower it either. This was his land. He would not step back from it. One of the riders moved forward. He sat tall in the saddle, his face calm, his eyes sharp and searching. There was no anger in his expression, which made him more dangerous than the rest. He stopped a few steps away. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the rider broke the silence. "We are looking for someone," he said, his voice steady. Ethan's gaze did not shift. "You are a long way from anywhere that concerns you." A faint smile touched the man's face, but it did not reach his eyes. "So are you." The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy. Ethan adjusted his stance slightly, his grip firm but controlled. "No one here but me." The rider studied him, as if weighing the truth of that statement. Then his eyes moved past Ethan, toward the house. At that same moment, the door behind Ethan creaked open. The sound was small, but it changed everything. Ethan did not need to turn to know who it was. The stranger stepped out slowly, his steps uneven but determined. He stopped beside the doorway, his face pale under the fading light. Every rider saw him. Every movement stopped. The air seemed to tighten, pulling all attention toward that single moment. "There you are," the leader said quietly. The stranger did not answer. Ethan finally turned his head, glancing back at him, then forward again. "Seems like you found what you came for." The rider nodded once. "You helped him." It was not a question. Ethan did not deny it. He needed help. A brief silence followed. Then the rider spoke again, his tone unchanged. "You helped the wrong man." Ethan let out a slow breath. "That depends on who you ask." A few of the riders shifted slightly, hands near their weapons. The tension grew, pressing in from all sides. The stranger took a small step forward, his voice strained but clear. "This is not his fight." No one moved. No one spoke. The fading sunlight stretched across the ground, casting long shadows between them. Ethan could feel the moment building, like a storm about to break. Every choice had led to this. Every step had brought it here. His land. His decision. And now, the consequences stood right in front of him. Waiting. The silence stretched across the yard, heavy and unbroken. No one moved. The last light of the sun rested low on the horizon, casting a deep glow over the land. Shadows grew longer, pulling across the ground between Ethan, the stranger, and the riders. It felt like everything was waiting for one man to decide what came next. Then the stranger stepped forward. His movement was slow, but steady. Each step looked like it cost him something, yet he did not stop. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than before. "Let it end here," he said. Ethan turned toward him. "You do not have to do this." The stranger met his eyes. For the first time, the fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." The riders watched in silence. The leader remained calm, his gaze fixed on the man approaching him. There was no rush, no sign of impatience. Only certainty. Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened for a moment. He could still raise it, still make a stand, still turn this into something else. But he did not. Because he understood now. This was never about defending the ranch. It was about a choice the stranger had to make. The man took another step forward, then another, until he stood halfway between Ethan and the riders. He paused, drawing a slow breath as if gathering what little strength he had left. "I ran," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "That is the truth." The leader did not react. "I thought I could get away," the stranger continued. "But all I did was bring this to someone who had nothing to do with it." He glanced back at Ethan. "You gave me a chance when you did not have to," he said. "You did not ask who I was. You did not ask what I had done." Ethan said nothing. "There are not many people left who would do that," the man added. A faint wind moved through the yard, lifting dust from the ground. The stranger turned back to the riders. "I will go with you," he said. The words settled into the silence. Final. The leader studied him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Good," he replied. Two of the riders moved forward, but slowly, without force. They did not grab the man. They did not need to. He stepped toward them on his own. Before reaching them, he stopped once more and looked back. At the ranch. At Ethan. "Thank you," he said. Simple words. But they carried weight. Then he turned and walked the rest of the distance. The riders closed around him, not tightly, but enough. The leader gave one last glance toward Ethan, his expression unreadable. Then he turned his horse. One by one, the others followed. The sound of hooves began again, steady and fading as they moved away from the ranch. The dust rose once more, but this time it drifted off into the distance. Gone. Just like that. The yard fell silent again. Ethan stood where he was, the rifle still in his hands, though the weight of it felt different now. Slowly, he lowered it to his side. The danger had passed. But something remained. He looked out toward the horizon where the riders had disappeared. The last light of the sun slipped away, leaving behind a quiet dusk. It had been a simple choice. Help a man in need. Nothing more. And yet, it had brought something real to his door. Not just trouble, but truth. Ethan turned and walked back toward the house, the stillness returning to the land around him. The ranch was the same as it had been that morning. But he was not. And deep down, he knew one thing for certain. If faced with the same choice again, he would do it all over. The riders faded into the horizon, leaving the ranch quiet once more. The dust settled slowly, and the sun sank lower, casting a warm glow over the fields. Ethan stood on the porch, rifle lowered, watching the empty trail. The stranger had gone with them, but the weight of the day remained. One simple act of kindness had brought danger to his doorstep, and yet it had also reminded him of something far more important. Courage and compassion always leave a mark. No matter the risk, helping someone in need can change lives, sometimes yours, sometimes theirs. If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that a single good deed can ripple far beyond what we see. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of bravery, kindness, and unexpected twists. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Ethan's place?